Well, joining us for our Emmy contenders production design panel is Howard Cummings from Westworld. Howard, thank you for being here.
Hi, Joyce. Glad to be
Hi,
here.
thank you. Well, season 3, complete reset. Theme park is destroyed. So what is it like for you as a production designer in the middle of a show's run for you to have to start anew, basically?
Well, actually, it was one of the reasons I signed on to Westworld was that I knew this was coming. And so we had been talking about it for like a couple of years. So it wasn't like a surprise. I knew eventually the robots would go crazy and get out. The question is, what do they encounter? And so that kept evolving. But but I think the big challenge for that show is they were going into, not a spaceship or the future was actually the real world, and they were going all different places. So that challenge of that is like, how do I take these, normal locations and amp them up, and how do we infuse things that we know is like Los Angeles? What does Los Angeles look like now, and how can we make it look like predict what it's going to look like in the future? So that was fun and challenging.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love the look that you guys came up with, like this very sort of almost hopeful like futurescape, because I think in a lot of shows and movies, the future is like dystopian, dilapidated, like rundown, is very bleak.
Yeah, and then Jonah Nolan and his wife Lisa Joy are the showrunners, and they specifically wanted non-dystopian. I mean, it's the setup for the show because you see, oh, gee, they conquered global warming and pollution. How did they do that? And everything is orderly, but it's all a setup for how when Dolores is the main character or rioter, sets everything ablaze. Mm-hmm. So the setup is better when you live in a non-dystopian world. Mm-hmm. So to figure that out, and to, one thing that's great is like just from the time that I've worked on Westworld, Los Angeles has been growing. And so we had access to like all these empty, brand new buildings that nobody was in, to shoot some of this stuff with elevated plazas, and which all fit within the genre of what we were looking for. And then we reinforced the whole thing by going to Singapore, which was convincing HBO why we had to go to Singapore was fun. but in many ways, Singapore had that sort of non-dystopian, idealized, futuristic, every building says its own thing kind of statement that we wanted.
Mm-hmm. They had greeneries like on like all their balconies. Yeah.
They have it everywhere. They have like every car overpass has greenery. They just I talked to one of the hoteliers, and they said that when they built the hotel, they figured out how much greenery they were displacing by the footprint of the hotel, and they doubled it vertically, all in vertical things. So it's really interesting. So one great thing we had on the show was I had a great futuristic advisor. He's an architect named Bjarke Ingels, and Bjarke is like pretty well-known architect, and he was a fan of the show. And so he just sort of the year before, he just sent word through some people and said, oh, I want to come by and look at the sets. And I said, really? Because I'd been pulling references of his buildings for what the future was going to be. Mm-hmm. And I said, wow, how fortuitous. So he showed up, and I thought, oh, he'll be here for an hour. He stayed for, I think, 6 hours. And then he finally saw the look on my face. He said, I guess you have other things you have to do. I said, well, kind of. But he, in the middle of that, he met with Jonah Nolan, and they struck up a friendship. And so Bjarke actually also felt Singapore was the place to go. And he also let us use some of his projects for when the visual effects department was creating the virtual Los Angeles, we used a lot of his projects, which was great.
Wow. Was that for like the skyline? Because the skyline is like a mix of new and old, like existing.
Well, that was one thing I felt like the future wasn't everybody doesn't knock everything down. They, mm-hmm. There's old and new. So I I felt like that was grounding things a little more. And I thought, and it freed us up because there's some beautiful old architecture in Los Angeles that we also utilized, some deco spaces and things, which was great.
Mm-hmm. So did you scout any locations? Like what was like an actual location and what did you have to design?
Oh, well, I looked at at everything I could in Los Angeles or anything that would let us through the door. And then we scouted also all of Singapore and also Spain. We went to Spain as well, which was great because actually Biarca has a place in Barcelona. We actually were going there, so we met up with him, and he got us in the door to a lot of places that normally we wouldn't. So we actually shot in one of my favorite architects' compound. His name is Ricardo Bofill, and he has this office that is a converted cement factory that was built in the 40s. And he added all this, he changed it, but kept a lot of it. And so he let us shoot in his where he lived and also in the offices. And that's where one character sort of wakes up and she's in this secret compound. And that's what we got to use, which was great. And but we also used the City of Arts and Sciences in Valencia. And that was the corporate headquarters campus for the Delos Corporation. So we also shot in Spain as for World War II in a small town called Besalú, which is north of Barcelona. And so, so the intent with all this was to take Los Angeles and then just expand it using all these other locations so that you weren't virtually doing everything. Of course, the skyline is, but the skyline, we actually plotted out like where the buildings were because the visual effects department didn't want to repeat buildings and stuff. So I actually had to kind of make the map of like, here's Los Angeles and here's where this area grew and this area grew farther south and this is what it is. And here are the buildings. We had to assign the buildings. And so we designing the buildings as we were going through the show to make sure we weren't like repeating things. So it was interesting.
I think you can, like in other like shows or movies, you could see like repeated like visual effects in the background sometimes. So that's
well, it's hard building a whole city, and you know, it takes some time. And then, you know, each neighborhood has its own character, so we were kind of moving around. And then we had part of our show was supposed to be in San Francisco, so that was a whole thing. And we didn't actually go to San Francisco, so we had to find parts of Los Angeles that look like San Francisco. Fortunately, I lived there for several years, so I kind of understood that. So, and there are some things that might look like that. So we kind of had to, you know, use everything we could.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned Delos, because I think this was the first time we saw like the whole like full, I guess, campus. I don't know. It looked like it was like a fuller view of it, and so it's still based on something we've seen before in the past 2 seasons. It wasn't like completely new like LA in 2058. But how did you go about like adapting, you know, that old palette into this new expansive world to show like Delos in the real world?
Well, yeah, that was a tricky part because suddenly you're, you know, the world of the park has a definite look, and then you see the underworkings, you know, which was what was called the Mesa, you know, where all the laboratories and offices are. Those had a distinctive style, and it was mostly concrete and glass, and quite dark, you know, and so I felt like that should relate to whatever we decided the campus of Delos was, that it's felt like there's some kind of corporate signature. So what I liked about Calatravas, who's the architect of the City of Arts and Sciences, that's all free-form concrete. It's all, so, which is similar, with similar materials to what you were used to. And then rather than it all being black, Calatrava, that is all white. So I thought, okay, well, there's this kind of relationship. So we still, like in that world, we still stuck to the show color palette, which is honestly white, black, gray and red, red, mostly blood, you know, and so that's what it is. And then you go in the real world and of course you can't control it to that extent, but you can tweak everything that you're coming up to in that regard. But I had it in our future Los Angeles, we did lots of graphics, you know, we had to take streets and close them down and turn them into plazas. And I would usually have to do that in a very short period of time because you couldn't really, you know, LA wasn't particularly interested in us shutting down their streets for even a whole day. So we had to make these kits, giant kits of planter boxes and road coverings and greens and, you know, bicycles and autonomous cars, you know, which we built like 4 concept vehicles that actually had to run and which was challenging, but and we also got to use a lot of concept cars like Audi lent us and Porsche, and which was great because they're just to make those is horrendously time consuming and quite expensive, and so it was really lucky to be able to get that kind of promotion.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I don't know when you guys will be able to shoot, but have you thought about season 4?
Yes, they've kind of kept that close to the vest. Something makes me feel like the park might come back in some form. I'm not sure it's the same park. You know, even in this season, they wrote in that the park burned, and it's because our sets did actually burn. There was a big fire in California, and the irony of that was when the robots first started revolting, they were in this town called Escalante, and that was sort of a testing ground. And while we were shooting it, it's actually in a national park, and it's kind of like there's a little old Western town that's been there forever, you know. But it's part of the park. And I said, gee, I wish I could make this look burned. And then the next year it did burn. So I said, we should use it again. And so the irony is the one thing we built in that town was the church. And when the fire happened, the only thing that didn't burn was the church. So I had to actually make it look burned. And the town burnt so completely that we had to add pieces into it to look so you saw what was there. Otherwise, it was just singed and gone. But I think I'm hoping, you know, there'll be more park adventures because they're really fun. I mean, like doing World War II in Spain was really hard, but really super fun. I got to work with this great Spanish crew, and you know, the hardest part was probably trying to keep it under wraps until, you know, we actually didn't want to give away what we were doing. But something told the town when the World War II tanks came in that that's what it was. And I just remember at one point where I was in the middle of the square and the company hadn't gotten there, and we were throwing down dirt to kind of cover up this very nicely done marble that they had just put down in this town square. And the tanks and everything pulled in, and literally all the kids in the village came out and started jumping on top of the tanks and playing, and it was like total chaos. But I said, I think the cat's out of the bag, but it was like, but they were so lovely that it was like super fun, that part of it. And then we had to kind of shoo them away because of safety. Yeah.
Well, Howard, it was great speaking with you. Can't wait for season 4 and see what else you come up with and burn sets. So we'll see you back here in a little bit. Thank you.
There's always chaos in Westworld, so you can rely on that.
That's true.